Hey guys, it's Colleen and we're starting on this webinar, and today we're going to be discussing how to not sabotage your closing. And a number of these things are things that your clients may do. If you are watching this and you're about to purchase a property, this is really important. Or if you're watching this and you're going to be listing a property, these are just basically the things that a lot of times we see, and there are things that have actually happened in our office, and they, for a lot of time, they may be deal breakers as far as all that stuff goes. So I am going to just do something real quick. Okay, so I'm going to go back and forth between my screens. Most of what I'm talking about is not going to be on a PowerPoint. It just, it's just things to kind of remember and keep us on track. So, hold on, wait a second. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I'm Colleen Balderson, and I am an attorney and part owner of the English Law Group, and we are title and closing attorneys located in Louisville, and we work throughout the Kentucky-Indiana area. I'm also licensed in Indiana, and we do closings, estate planning, and probate. So, goodness, excuse me. We also do small business law. So most of these things blend very well together. And because we do all aspects, we understand how the pitfalls can happen with closings and what you may or may not know. Most of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about are things that you probably just were not aware that it would handle. It could potentially hamper your closing. I don't think very many people who are in contracts really want something to go wrong, but we all know that they can, and they do. So, so we're just going to get started. Okay. So I'm going to do a countdown. This is a countdown. There are many, many, many more, but in respect of people's time, we're just going to be covering 7 things today. And the first thing is to know your client's marital status. We get a lot of times, if you're in Indiana, the marital status is not that important. But in Kentucky, it's crucial. There's something called Dower and Curtsy. If you're an agent, you know what I'm talking about. But if you're not, the Kentucky statutes have a law that if you are married, you are entitled to, it's a little bit more complicated this, but roughly half of your spouse's property if they were to pass. Because of this, there's something called Dower and Curtsy rights, and they're inchoate rights, basically meaning they haven't vested. Yes, they may not, but husbands have curtsy and wives have dower, interest in their spouse's property. And because of this, when you have a closing in Kentucky, you have to disclose the marital status. And if you're buying a property and you need a loan, both parties will have to sign the mortgage. The thing that is very confusing for people is that in our society, we don't use a proper terminology. A note is what creates the loan. So if you're using your credit, they're looking at your income, you're signing the note. You're saying, I promise to pay this. If you are, if it's just your spouse that's signing that, you are signing off on the mortgage, acknowledging that there's a lien being put on a piece of property. Either you own with them if you're put on the deed, or you may potentially own if they were to pass away before you. So because of this, it's extremely important that we know the marital status. Sometimes people get married prior to closing. Sometimes people file for divorce prior to closing. It is super important to know what your client's marital status is. If you're an agent in Kentucky, it is your fiduciary responsibility to know, and your ethical responsibility to know the marital status. It may seem kind of silly to ask if they're walking around with a fiance, but we've had instances where person goes shopping with their fiance. They decide that the husband's or the man's gonna buy this house, and then when he goes to fill our online portal for information, he discloses that he's married, has been for a really long time, and they're legally separated. His spouse would have to sign off on documents. So If a person is estranged from their spouse, that could be very difficult. People that may be in great, the most amicable divorce you've ever seen, social media discloses things a lot of times that people aren't happy about. So it could be that, one day a spouse is good to sign off and the next day they're not. It's really important to know the marital status so that you can have a conversation, or the attorney can have a conversation with the spouse to determine what will need to be signed and what their level of involvement is. There's a little workaround for this, but usually the general rule is that the spouse has to be involved. They don't have to buy it with them, but they may have to be involved if they're going to have a loan. And different types of loans have different, different workarounds, but that's the general rule. Another thing is that if a person's getting divorced, that could play into maintenance, the potential child support issues. So their debt to income ratio could change depending upon, their marital status. Long story short, we need to know if the person's married, and then just make sure that you ask who needs to come to closing, because we'll typically tell you, but a lot of times people come to closing and they're like, oh, I didn't even know. So then the spouse has to drive from across town. We've had one where a person got married a week before closing and their spouse was living in a different state. We had to finagle the logistics of getting documents signed. So the more information we have up front, the better. All right, so that's the first one. All right. Find out if they're in forbearance or default. This is something that you would think would probably be important to know. With COVID, there are a lot of people who maybe can't make their mortgage payments, and maybe they are in forbearance. What forbearance means is that they've actually talked to the bank, and the bank has acknowledged that they will put a hold on their payments. It's not going to affect their credit, that kind of thing, but it's probably in a different department that if we need to get a payoff for closing. So if we need to pay off the mortgage with the seller, we're going to need to probably call a different, rather than the normal payoff department, we probably would have to call the default department. Those usually take about 10 business days to get that information. It is an extremely awkward question sometimes for people. They don't want to ask their clients if they're in default, if they're in a bankruptcy, all those really kind of crucial things. But it is very important that your agent know it if you're the seller, or if you are the agent, that you've asked them. They may have plenty of money to cover the payoff, and they're even going to walk away with money, but just know that it could take a little bit longer to get that payoff. So if we find out on a Tuesday that they want to close on Thursday, if the person's in default, if the seller is in default or forbearance, permission, it may be, it could be 2 weeks before we can get that payoff in those numbers. So my advice is to, when you're taking, when you get into a contract, have the seller request a payoff, just straight up. Not a screenshot of their balance online, because that's different. A payoff is going to have, if there's a release fee, it's going to say if their escrows, positive or negative, probably. It's going to say how much interest. It'll show if there's attorney's fees, if they're in default or something. It'll have if there's a prepayment penalty. All those kinds of things will be on that sheet. Now, in the interim between when they request that and when they actually close, they may make a payment, but worst case scenario, we get an updated payoff, and we can still move forward with closing because we at least know a ballpark figure of what we're going to need to collect. There are quite a few lenders now, and I don't know if it's because of COVID or what, but it seems like there's more and more lenders that are taking longer. So as a general rule, we typically don't order a payoff for the seller until we know when it's going to close, because they make payments. Sometimes they get charged for each payoff that you request, $15, something like that. Some of them don't charge anything. There's some lenders that are super fast. Wells Fargo, we usually get a payoff in like 20, 45 minutes, but there's some payoffs that will take up to 5 days. That's the rule. That's just what they do. I have a list of the ones that take a little bit longer. So if you're interested in getting that list, so that you can at least know that if your client tells you that that's who's servicing your loan, you have a little cheat sheet, you look at it and say, okay, we definitely need to get a payoff early for this. at our office, we are trying to get those things early if we know that it's one of those lenders. But even then, sometimes the clients don't give us their information until, you know, right before closing. So please make sure that your clients have their loan number, and we cannot pull it based on their social. I would advise that as an agent, you probably don't need to be getting that information. It's just one more thing that you have to protect. And if something happens and your security gets jeopardized, then you gotta, you know, call your clients and all, you know, there could be identity theft, all kinds of stuff. But the clients need to get that information. The seller needs to get that information. As soon as you know who's closing it, call that title company, give them the loan number, and they probably will at least need the last 4 digits of the social in case there's any liens or anything like that that need to be cleared. But that would be so, so helpful. It will not make a closing not happen, where, you know, if somebody's spouse won't sign off, then, you know, you're in some deep trouble. But if, you know, if a spouse is missing, you know, or they can't find them, but a payoff may just push it out, and you have some disgruntled clients and their expectations are not met, and it just doesn't make everybody feel good. So we always want to make everybody happy. So the more information up front, the better. Okay, so number 5. Hold on. Find out early if they're going to have a power of attorney, and get the maybe get a power of attorney ready in case of COVID. So we have had, I mean, just lately in the last couple of weeks, we have had quite a few people who were either mandated that they quarantine because they've been in contact with somebody who had COVID, or we actually have 2 files going on right now where the people have tested positive for COVID. If it is someone who's computer savvy, we could potentially do an electronic signature on a power of attorney. Somebody can come in. We had a guy who got a letter saying that he couldn't come to closing because he'd been in contact with someone. He had to self-quarantine. We are not going to go away. We are not going to be in violation of those letters if we know about them. That the person has to stay home. For one, we don't want to infect everyone else. It's just not worth it. You know, for some people, you know, in that case, the guy had a negative test result. We did a Zoom call. His wife picked up the documents. We did a Zoom call. They signed them all in front of us, you know, required with those, with that information. Please note that Zoom meetings and that kind of, you know, it's a wet signature, but in order to do that, they have to be in Kentucky. We cannot, if the person lives across the river or if they're in Tennessee or something like that, that is not an option. In order for us to notarize over Zoom or, you know, another platform that is recorded, it's got to be recorded. So FaceTime's probably not going to work. They have to be in the state of Kentucky. Electronic notary, which looks more like a DocuSign, that's an option, but a lot of lenders won't allow that for all the documents, but we could probably get away with it for a power of attorney. If you know the person's going to be out of town, or for whatever reason they're not going to be around, make sure the earliest you can get that power of attorney you know, approved, not only by the title company, but also by the lender if it's for the buyer. A lot of lenders are very specific as to what that buyer's documents say. And then we also don't want to generate a bunch of documents and it not reflect the power of attorney because the lender didn't know about it or it was too last minute or something like that. May not be a bad idea for if you have some older clients that may not, or, you know, younger clients that may not be more, you know, computer savvy where they could get on the Zoom call or do that kind of thing. Maybe see if they have a durable power of attorney, send that over, see if it has the power to sell. If they're selling and there's some reason that they can't sign, we could potentially use that. We had to go to the hospital last week. I had to pick up a power of attorney because this couple, both of them were in the hospital, neither one of them for COVID, but just for different reasons. Nobody would have anticipated that, but we got the power of attorney, got it done, but it was, you know, it was a tricky situation. So, you know, having that backup, you know, just in case. And we are seeing a lot more of people getting COVID and, you know, needing power of attorneys. There's no way to project that, but if you know that they've got a durable power of attorney, maybe send it over and let's see if we could use it. And, you know, hopefully we never will have to, but, you know, might be an option. All right, so let's see. let's do number 4. Be careful of Black Friday. This is the rule all the time, but Black Friday, we always end up seeing somebody the first weekend in or the first weekend December. You know, Black Friday sales are going on right now. What happens is people go out and they get 12 months, same as cash. They get, you know, the refrigerator they've been waiting for. We had a person buy a dining room set from, you know, from Pier 1 the day before closing. We had one guy who just opened up a new credit card because he wanted the Marriott points. That was a couple years ago. For most of these things, it will not completely stop the closing. It just takes it longer. You got to sit around, they got to pull the credit again. And it may be that you're not going to close that day. It'll eventually happen, but maybe not that day. Now, if a person goes and they co-sign for a car for their child, or they go and get a boat, or they, you know, sometimes, you know, inevitably they have to sign, you know, co-sign for student loans for their kids, things like that. Some of those things will knock them out of the debt to income ratio, and they will not be able to buy. They will not be able to buy the house. So they may have a lot of furniture, but then they don't have anywhere to put it. It is, and you know, Black Friday is one of the biggest times of year where it happens because these deals are just so good. They can usually keep shopping, but if they're going to get a really big purchase and it's going to, you know, use up all their credit, even if it's not a new line of credit, it's one that they've already had, that could really put them in jeopardy as well of their debt to income. It could also mess with their credit score because now they don't have as much available credit. So just please remind your clients right now that if you are going, or if you're refinancing or something like that, don't open up any new lines of credit and don't make any huge purchases. The money that you're going to save on it may not be worth the interest rate that you could get, and, you know, potentially the house that you certainly want to own. All right, so now we have keep the same employment. Don't quit your job. Now, this would seemingly be, you know, pretty obvious, but we just, you know, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, someone quit their job. Just because they've had their employment check doesn't mean that they're not going to come back and check it again. And if they knowingly quit their job and then sign off saying nothing has changed, they're committing mortgage fraud. That is not good. It's possible that their company gets bought out, they continue to keep the same pay, all that kind of stuff. That's no big deal. No big deal at all. Sometimes they can switch jobs within the industry, but they got to check with their loan officer. I've, you know, said at closings where someone was like, you know, my dream job came along and I couldn't take it because I didn't want to mess with the purchase of this house. And bravo to them for realizing that that's a big deal. So it seems like something that would be obvious, but it is very important that people don't quit jobs. And even if it's a second job and they're like, you know what, I just don't want to do it. If they're using that income to get them approved for the loan, then they may not be approved for the loan anymore. It could be the difference between $20, you know, on their debt to income ratio that knocks them out of there. So please just remember that and know that they will check employment. You know, sometimes they check it the day after closing to make sure that they were, you know, employed that day. But sometimes they check it the morning of closing. So, you know, just because they've checked it doesn't mean they're not going to. And it really means that, I mean, you got to be truthful on these. When you sign an application at closing, you're stating that nothing's really changed since you've applied for the loan. So, you know, with that, we got to be truthful. All right. So moving right along, we have this is one that we see this so often. Doesn't necessarily stop the closing, but a lot of times we see it that it just really leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth if it's not done. So when you are, you know, calling your client, they are, you know, getting ready to close, and this could be two different numbers, but we just put them together. Make sure the repairs are done early. If they're waiting till the day of closing to get these repairs done, or the day before, something's going to happen. inevitably something is going to happen, that the repair person's going to get a flat tire, or, you know, who knows. So we want to make sure that these repairs are done ahead of time. If they can take pictures of them and send them over so that people can see them. We have so many instances where people are going through the walkthrough and they're either dissatisfied with the repair, or they just haven't happened. Maybe it's that they were supposed to get, you know, something done and the part's not there. Well, better to know 5 days before closing than, you know, the hour before. We cannot escrow for repairs. We're not supposed to do that. So one thing we can do is, if there is a repair and we have an invoice, we can pay invoices on the settlement statement out of the sellers. But we can't hold on to money and just say, hey, may or may not be $500 to repair the drywall. You know, we're going to hold on to it, and if it's done, great. If it's not, then we'll just give the money to the buyer. We cannot do that. We did it years and years ago, but any money that is, we just can't do that. So any money that is being changed hands has to be on the settlement statement. It just has to. In a cash transaction, way more lenient. You could put credits, you can do all kinds of things, but if there's a lender involved, all of that money has to be accounted for. And you even sign when you sign the settlement statement, you're stating that there are no outside agreements. There's nothing that's left to be done. So it's very important that that's the case. Also, make sure your clients know when they're supposed to move out. So we have instances where the person's like, well, you know, this closing got moved so many times and I'm just not out. Sorry. That is a very difficult situation. Nobody likes that. So, you know, obviously there are times when a closing can get moved numerous times for so many different reasons. And sometimes I mean, it's like, my goodness, how many more times can this thing get rescheduled? But just know that if your client said simultaneously with closing and those keys were going to transfer, that's the expectation. That's what they need to do. There are, if you are going to have it where the seller is now going to be staying in the property for a day or two because, you know, this wasn't on, so now their closing's not on, or they, you know, whatever. You can do a delayed possession agreement, and I strongly advise that you use the Greater Louisville Association of Realtor delayed possession agreement. As an agent, that's the one you're permitted to use. It thinks of basically everything, and there is a lot of things that cover yourself, where you're not making promises and disclosing about insurance and all that kind of stuff. So it all kind of takes care of it there. And as an agent, with your licensed, you know, and you're a member of Greater Louisville Association of Realtors, you can use the GLAR form, and that's really the one that you should be using if it comes down to that. Also speaks about if they're not out by a certain day, then what? You know, sometimes people say, well, we want you to hold on to, you know, $2,000 in case they're not out. Again, we can't hold on to money, you know, that may be going back to the buyer, because the lender would need to know that. So we can't escrow for that kind of thing, unfortunately. One of the reasons that, you know, one of the things that we do is we can help in having that conversation. We can try to think up solutions, you know, but again, it's better to not have these things come through with the walkthrough that they haven't moved their elliptical machine and they need movers to do it, and they can't get it out. Or they just got a bunch of stuff that they just decided they didn't want, and they're just going to leave it there. And now the buyer needs to get a dumpster for it. You know, there's all these kinds of things. So make sure that you talk with your clients about what's going on. If you are a seller, know the expectation is that you are going to leave it broom clean, with exception to taking everything with you. You can't just, you know, you can fill up a trash can, but you can't leave a bunch of stuff in a shed or on the side. You're going to take everything with you, except for those items that are supposed to stay per the contract. If you are writing the contract and you know that you want a refrigerator to stay, be specific as to which one, because if there's 2 refrigerators, no, they may take the stainless steel one and leave the one in the garage. That I've seen that happen. As an agent, you need to let them know what is expected to stay and what is not. So if there is, there's a dishwasher that's a fixture and it's inside there, they can't, you know, I've heard that, you know, they pull apart the countertops to get things out. So I don't know if these things are done maliciously. I think most of the time people just don't know. So make sure that you know, things that may be seemingly obvious to you may not be to a person who doesn't move every day. So the more that you can lay it out, what needs to be, you know, what needs to stay and what needs to go, the better. Crystal clear on these things. And the move out date, very, very clear. Those things are usually, I mean, that you're talking about a lot more issues if the person is not going to be out. People are fearful of damage to property, you know, insurance, like all the things. So if they're supposed to be out, they should be out. All right, now, here is the most important one that can, you know, most of these things, if they happen, they can be fixed. In real estate, I always say everything can be fixed. At most, everything can be fixed as long as you can wait around for it to be fixed, and it might be expensive to get it fixed, but usually things can be fixed. One thing that usually cannot be fixed is wire fraud. Usually when that money goes out, it's gone, okay? So it is extremely important if you are purchasing a property, if you are selling a property, if you are representing somebody who's in that transaction, warn people about wire fraud. I don't think people realize how much this real estate industry is just, this wire fraud is everywhere. Anymore, the banks are pretty much on lockdown, you know, credit card companies, but one place where money just moves around a lot is in the real estate industry. It's just, I mean, it's just the nature of the industry. And what we see is that that people will they'll get instructions and they trust that they come from their agent and that, you know, the agent may be sending it to them and they go ahead and do it. We had a client where they got an email and it looked like the realtor's email, and it said, go ahead and send a bulk amount of money to this company. That was on a Thursday. On Tuesday, the buyers called and wanted to know if we received $198,000. We had not, okay? We don't know who sent that email to them, but it said something like, I'm not gonna, you know, I'm in and out of classes all day, or I'm in meetings, so I won't be able to answer my phone. Please go ahead and send this money. The person who sent the money actually worked in security, cybersecurity, in her former job. She said she knew better. She said she was exhausted. She wasn't thinking straight, and she just didn't want anything to go wrong, so she went ahead and did it, okay? Somehow, by the grace of God, these people got their money back. It still baffles me that they were able to do that. It took tears, about a week and a half, sleepless nights. You can only imagine, almost $200,000. Please tell this story to your clients. They may not realize when you say wire fraud what you're talking about, but if you tell them a story with $200,000, they're going to know. They're going to remember. We have had emails come across our office where it says, hey, my clients changed their mind. Now they want their money wired. Please send it. Please send this amount to this bank. You know, we've called, and that's not the case. They did not want that money sent. You know, they can these fraudsters are getting really tricky, or they're really smart. And they know what to do. It doesn't look like the Nigerian Prince email. It looks legit. So one thing I would say is to just let your clients know that you will never, as an agent, never ever send them information on wiring. That needs to come directly from the title company. It should come in a secure email, and they should always call, Google the number. Don't use a number on a wiring instructions to verify. Call and confirm that it's legitimate. Wire instructions don't usually change. If they've already got one and they confirmed it, the title company is not going to send them something saying, hey, we've switched our wiring instructions. Now we want you to send it to this bank. It's not going to happen, okay? If something like that happens, they are going to call you. It won't happen in our office because we just use one escrow account. So, but there are some companies where they have used numerous escrow accounts, and it could be that they sent the wrong one. But I'd sure as heck want to talk to somebody to verify it, and not on the number of the wiring instructions. If the wiring instructions, the title of the receiving bank and the account holder doesn't match who you're closing with, then don't send it. The one that got sent for 200,000 said it just went to lawyers company or something like that, like law firm lawyers or something. That's not our company. That's not our office. So there's some red flags, but if you're, if you've been packing all week and you're exhausted, red flags aren't going to be red flags. It's just going to look like it's what it's supposed to look like. So you can all day long have we all have it on the bottom of our emails saying, wiring is on the alert and stuff. But first of all, not a lot of people read those, the bottom of your emails. And secondly, it doesn't substitute for a real conversation. You should have them sign something. I would even have them sign it that's separate from all the other things that you have them sign, and tell them the story of the $200,000. People will remember that. Maybe it'll be the one thing that they're like, wait a second, didn't I hear something? Oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't be sending this money, because that's a deal breaker. If they have no money to bring to closing, then they don't, and then it's probably not going to happen. And what is $3,000 to one person could be the same as 300 to somebody else. So usually it's all the money that they've saved up in order to have this huge, most important transaction of their lives. So don't be involved in collecting wiring instructions. I wouldn't even be copied on it if I were you. I would want nothing to do with that if you're an agent. If you're a buyer or a borrower, and you're wiring money for something, a refinance or a purchase, or even as a seller, sometimes the sellers are upside down and they need to send some money to the title company. Please be very wary and extremely cautious before you hit that send button or you tell the teller to hit send. It is super, super important. And that is about it for the ways to sabotage a closing. There are a lot of other ways, but those are the ones that we've been seeing the most of. If you'd like to get a list of the 10 commandments for things not to do before closing that you can send to your clients, please email me, Colleen@EnglishLawGroup.com. And I do have a YouTube account, YouTube channel for the English Law Group. Subscribe and you can get the latest updates. We'll be doing these webinars about once a month, and we will also have them saved and on our website so you can watch them at any time. If you have any ideas of what you would like me to talk about, please let me know that too. So we really appreciate everything. I hope to see you at a closing table. Stay well. Thanks.